Hello, and welcome to my review of the Darksword Armory Messer. A messer is a single-edged medieval sword that was used from about 1300 to about 1500 Europe, and it had the distinguishing feature of a knife-like hilt. Basically, there are two types of messers: a lang or gross messer, meaning large knife, where the weapon was about a yard or so long, and it primarily was used with one hand. The second version is a Craig messer, or war knife, and they were generally significantly larger, larger than a foot and a half, and could be used with one or two hands. The blades, aside from being single-edged, unlike most of the medieval weapons which were double-edged, can vary greatly in size and in shape. The curve or the straightness of the blade could also be different. Some were better suited for cutting, others were better suited for stabbing. Some were better suited or effectively used for both. So there's tremendous variety in messers, their shape, their size, and their use. Now, aside again from being single-edged, the hilt is what really defines a messer. And they have a slab or block tang, which comes up and is generally sandwiched between two wooden grips like this one. And then they're held in place with pins. And of course, that has a very distinctive knife look to it. They generally have straight cross guards and perhaps a little nagel here to also help protect the hand. And as I said before, they could be used as single or two-handed weapons. The pommel, and really it's not a pommel, it's a cap, formed the end of the grip. There's a very good typology for single-edged weapons, and it's under development by a gentleman named James Elmsley. And it's very similar to Oakeshot's typology for dual-sided weapons. And I basically say under development because Elmsley has been working on publishing a book now for a number of years, which is still not in publication. But you can find his writings in a number of different sources on the internet, as well as it has been used in a number of different museums for typing these types of weapons. Most recently in a German museum, the Klingen Museum, they published a 192-page catalog around the sword form and thought exhibition in Forum that took place a few years ago. And the Elmsley typology was a key part of that for single-edged weapons. There's also been a number of videos done by Shadversity on YouTube, which talk specifically about the Elmsley typology. The typology basically categorizes medieval single-edged weapons based upon a couple of key things. First is the hilt. And if the hilt is sword-like, then it's a falchion. If it's knife-like, then it's a messer. Other than that, basically they look identical. In terms of where these weapons were primarily used, falchions were primarily used in southern France and northern Italy, while messers were generally used more commonly in Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. So in the Elmsley typology, the first thing gets a letter, an M or an F, whether it's a messer or a falchion. Then, based upon the shape of the blade and its curvature, there are then letters and numbers associated with the blade as well. So, the Darksword Armory messer would be categorized under the Elmsley typology as an M3B0. And that would define, again, the shape, the curvature of the blade, and the type of hilt it has, in this case, a messer. There are lots of different theories about the origin of the messer and some of them are in direct opposition to each other. One of the first ones, which I think has been primarily debunked over time, is that the law forbid people carrying swords. So in order to protect themselves, they disguised their sword with a knife-like handle and got to carry it around. I don't think people would be fooled that an item that of this length of blade or longer, and that can be used in a manner of a sword for stabbing, chopping, cutting, et cetera, is going to be fooled by the hilt construction and say it's not a sword. At the same time, the opposite is often highlighted as well, that the law required people to own or carry a sword. And, while that may be true, then the thinking goes on that sword-like hilts were harder to make than knife-like hilts, and therefore these would be cheaper or more readily available in greater numbers, and therefore the supply would be available to people. That again, is a theory that holds many holes, maybe some truth, but it's hard to believe that would have been the impetus. And there's not much recorded on either side of laws requiring or laws forbidding people to carry swords and or weapons. There's definitely some class issues around swords, and swords being more of an aristocratic item. But once again, it's very hard to support those two. One of the third items, and I think this is definitely one supported by Elmsley, is that the guild structure of the time resulted in there being this split between weapons made by knife makers versus weapons made by sword makers or swordsmiths. Guilds are basically like unions. They represent a certain group of people doing certain activities, and that could range from sword making, knife making, bread making, construction, people making homes or houses, et cetera. And the guilds had quite a bit of power. We do know that, and we do know that cities could have 30, 40, 50 guilds in them, and that's well recorded as well. So I think, and Elmsley's theory is that the guilds, in terms of controlling who did what, how much they made, the setting of prices, and other activities, and perhaps agreements between them, sword makers with knife makers, in terms of the production of swords and or messers, large knives, resulted in some of the developments around how many were available, the price points that were set, and therefore the popularity of those types of weapons in certain areas. While we'll never be able to prove any of these things categorically, that's definitely something that makes a lot of sense, that it was, economics and the free market to a certain extent that drove the development and the popularity of an item like the messer. Okay, so now let's take a little bit of time and talk about the Darksword Armory messer. As I said earlier, under the Elmsley typology, this is an M for messer, 3B0. The overall length of the item is 30 inches. The blade itself is 22 inches long. It's made from 5160 high carbon steel. It's been hand forged and dual tempered. The width of the item is about 2.5 inches at its widest. It has a thin fuller running down most of the blade. And at the tip here, it has this false edge, which can also be sharpened, and about 6 inches long, and makes it a very effective stabbing weapon. As well as from looking at it, you can see that it would have no problem chopping, hacking, and cutting as well. The hilt is 7.5 inches long. The guard is 8.25 inches long. It has this heavy rectangular block in the middle, which forms the basis of what connects to the blade. It then has these two pieces branching out and widening as you go along. They're actually 8-sided with a nice little ridge cut around them. And it's a very nice treatment of the guard. The nagel is in the form of a seashell, and it has actually been inserted into the block of the guard and then welded in place. And the weld is very neat. It's been sanded down. It's very smooth. The key piece here, which really makes a messer, is the grip coming down through the hilt and into the cap at the end. This is a full block tang. It's sandwiched in between two pieces of hardwood. The hardwood is very well sanded and rounded at the corners. It's a perfect fit for my hand, but if you have really large hands, you probably find this a little small for you. But it can be used with 1 or 2 hands. As you see where my hand is, you can get 2 hands on here very easily. And once again, there's 3 pins that hold the grip in place. There is a very nice cap on the end of the hilt. There's basically 3 layers to it, a small layer at the end, a middle piece, and then the bottom piece is a crossed braid type pattern. It's very well made, very well finished, and very neatly attached to the end of the hilt. The sword itself weighs just about 3 pounds, and it comes with a extremely well-made scabbard. The scabbard is made of wood, wrapped in a high-quality leather. This is the Darksword Armory optional scabbard that includes the integrated sword belt. So the sword belt is actually attached to the scabbard and ready for use and wearing. You know, if you're looking for a extremely well-constructed, a really good representation of a messer with all its key component pieces, this would be a great addition to your collection, and one I'm sure that would result in a lot of conversation and questions as you display it. Thank you very much.